I should have seen it coming. The whispers that stopped when I entered the break room. The shared glances between my coworkers when they thought I wasn't looking. The sudden exclusion from lunch invitations and after-work drinks. But I was too focused on the promotion. Too consumed by the possibility of finally moving up after 5 years of dedication to Meridian Solutions. 5 years of arriving first and leaving last. 5 years of picking up projects nobody wanted. 5 years of covering for the very people who were now quietly working to destroy everything I'd built. My name is Alex Mitchell, and this is the story of how I discovered my co-worker's betrayal, how it broke me, and how I engineered the most satisfying revenge possible. Success. You were the obvious choice, Alex, my boss Gerald said, his eyes not quite meeting mine as he delivered the news. But ultimately, the team felt Ryan would bring a more collaborative approach to the senior project manager position. I sat in the leather chair across from Gerald's desk, my expression carefully neutral despite the earthquake happening inside me. Ryan Hamilton, 3 years my junior in both age and company experience. The same Ryan who had borrowed my project framework last quarter and presented it as his own innovative approach. The same Ryan who could barely manage his existing workload without coming to me for help. I see, I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. And was there specific feedback about my performance? Areas I should improve? Gerald shuffled papers on his desk, a nervous habit I'd observed countless times when he was uncomfortable. Nothing specific, no. You're an excellent worker, Alex. Sometimes excellence can be intimidating to others. Ryan just seemed to have more team support. Team support. The words felt like acid in my stomach. Thank you for letting me know. I managed, rising from the chair on legs that felt dangerously unsteady. I appreciate your candor. Gerald nodded, relief flooding his features as he realized I wasn't going to make a scene. There will be other opportunities, Alex. Keep doing what you're doing. I nodded and walked out of his office with my dignity intact, even managing small talk with his secretary before making my way to the bathroom. Once locked inside a stall, I pressed my forehead against the cool metal partition and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. I had been passed over. Despite my superior qualifications, despite my dedication, despite everything I had sacrificed for this company. And not because I wasn't good enough, but because I was too good, and that made people uncomfortable. Or at least that's what Gerald wanted me to believe. But I knew better. This wasn't about intimidation. This was sabotage. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Melissa, my closest friend at Meridian, and the only coworker I trusted implicitly. Are you okay? Heard about Ryan. Can we talk? I quickly typed back, bathroom. 3rd floor. 3 minutes later, Melissa's familiar knock echoed against the bathroom door. I emerged from the stall, grateful to see concern rather than pity in her eyes. This is bullshit, Alex, she said immediately. Everyone knows you deserve that promotion. I turned to the mirror, straightening my blazer and checking that my eyes weren't as red as they felt. Apparently not everyone. Gerald said Ryan had more team support. Melissa's reflection frowned behind me. That's because Ryan has been actively campaigning against you for weeks. He's been having little chats with everyone on the team, planting seeds of doubt about your management style. My hands froze in the act of smoothing my hair. What? He told Monica you criticized her data analysis to Gerald. He convinced Jason you were trying to take credit for the Westfield project. He even suggested to Tara that you were the reason her flexible schedule request was denied. Each word hit like a physical blow. These were people I had mentored, helped, covered for. People I'd considered friends as well as colleagues. How do you know this? I asked, turning to face her. Because he tried it with me too, Melissa said, crossing her arms. Told me you'd said my marketing strategy for the Davidson account was amateur hour. I knew it was bullshit because we'd just been celebrating that same strategy over drinks the previous weekend. My mind raced back over the past month. The increasing coldness from my team, the conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, the sudden exclusion from email threads where I'd previously been included. It all made sickening sense now. But that's not all. Melissa continued, lowering her voice. I overheard Ryan and Diana in the copy room yesterday. They were laughing about some presentation slides they'd altered in your final pitch deck to Gerald. Diana. My stomach dropped. Diana Chen, the team's graphic designer, who had helped me finalize my presentation for Gerald just days ago. The same presentation where several key data points had somehow been incorrect, making me appear unprepared and careless when Gerald questioned the discrepancies. They changed my slides? My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Melissa nodded grimly. And from what I could gather, They also deleted some emails from Gerald to you about the Applewood client requirements, which explains why your proposal missed several key elements that Ryan's miraculously included. I felt physically ill. This wasn't just office politics or fair competition. This was coordinated sabotage. A targeted campaign to undermine everything I'd worked for. I trusted them, I whispered. All of them. I know, Melissa squeezed my arm. And they knew that too. That's why it worked. I walked back to my desk in a daze, mechanically responding to coworkers who stopped me to offer condolences about the promotion. How many of them had been part of it? How many faces expressing sympathy now had laughed behind my back as they helped dismantle my career? Ryan was holding court by the coffee machine, accepting congratulations with a practiced mixture of humility and excitement. Our eyes met briefly across the office floor. He had the audacity to smile and raise his coffee mug in acknowledgement. I nodded stiffly and turned away, unable to stomach the performance. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I answered emails, attended a team meeting where Gerald officially announced Ryan's promotion, and even managed appropriate applause when everyone else clapped. But inside, something had fundamentally changed. A switch had been flipped that couldn't be turned back off. By the time I arrived home that evening to my empty apartment, the shock had begun to crystallize into something else, something harder and colder. I kicked off my shoes and poured myself a generous glass of bourbon, then settled on my balcony overlooking the city. 5 years of my life dedicated to Meridian Solutions, countless weekends sacrificed, relationships neglected, all for a company where my so-called team had conspired against me without a second thought. My phone pinged with a notification from the company's internal messaging system. Congratulations were pouring in on Ryan's promotion announcement. Jason, who I'd covered for countless times when his son was sick, wrote, "So well deserved. Couldn't have gone to a better person." Monica, who'd come to me in tears last year when she thought she might be fired, had added, "The best choice for the team. So excited for this new chapter." I turned my phone off and stared out at the city lights, the bourbon burning a path down my throat that matched the slow burn building in my chest. Betrayal was giving way to anger now, a clarifying rage that cut through the fog of shock. I had given everything to this company, to these people, and they had collaborated to ensure I got nothing in return. The question was, what was I going to do about it? That night, sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, replaying conversations and interactions from the past several months through this new lens of betrayal. How long had this been going on? Had it always been this way? Had I been naive to believe that hard work and dedication would be rewarded in a corporate environment where politics apparently trumped performance? Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and moved to my home office. I opened my laptop and began to write. Not a plan, not yet, but a documentation of everything that had happened. Every project I'd led, every idea that had been appropriated without credit, every late night and early morning I'd devoted to Meridian Solutions. And then, quite unexpectedly, I found myself opening a new document. At the top, I typed Meridian Solutions, Gaps and Vulnerabilities. Almost without conscious thought, I began listing every inefficiency, every outdated process, every client complaint I'd encountered. I detailed the weaknesses in our service delivery model, the blind spots in our market approach, the untapped customer segments we consistently neglected. By the time dawn's light crept through my blinds, I had compiled 15 pages of detailed analysis. It wasn't a plan for revenge, not explicitly, but it was something perhaps more valuable, a blueprint for competition. For the first time since walking out of Gerald's office, I felt something other than devastation. I felt a spark of possibility. I showered, dressed, and prepared for work with mechanical precision. Today would be different. Today I would begin observing Meridian not as a dedicated employee, but as a future competitor. Every process, every client relationship, every team dynamic was now valuable intelligence. "You look different," Melissa commented when we met at our usual coffee spot before heading into the office. "Do I?" I stirred my coffee, avoiding her perceptive gaze. "More focused, less destroyed. Did you take something?" I allowed a small smile. "Just a dose of clarity." "Clarity," she repeated skeptically. "Is that what we're calling bourbon these days?" "I'm not going to let them see me break, Melissa," I said quietly. "That's what they want, for me to rage or resign or make a scene that justifies their actions retroactively. So what are you going to do?" I considered my answer carefully. Melissa was the one person I trusted, but even trust had limits in the wake of such betrayal. "I'm going to do my job. Exactly my job. Nothing more, nothing less." Her eyebrows rose. The famous Alex Mitchell work ethic reduced to mere adequacy? That I have to see. That day, I implemented the first phase of what would eventually become my revenge. I came in at exactly 9 a.m. rather than my usual 7:30. I took my full lunch hour instead of eating at my desk. I left precisely at 5 p.m. And most importantly, I stopped volunteering solutions to problems that weren't explicitly mine to solve. The change was subtle enough not to raise immediate alarms, but noticeable to those who had come to depend on my constant availability and willingness to take on additional work. By the end of the week, the effects were becoming apparent. Ryan, now settling into his role as senior project manager, scheduled a one-on-one meeting with me. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of casual concern as we sat in one of the small conference rooms. Just wanted to check in, he began, leaning back in his chair with the false ease of someone unaccustomed to authority. You've seemed a bit distant this week. I offered a neutral smile. Have I? I wasn't aware my demeanor was being monitored. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. It's not monitoring, Alex. It's concern. The team has noticed you're less engaged. I believe I'm fulfilling all my responsibilities as outlined in my job description, I replied evenly. Has my performance been lacking in some measurable way? No, not exactly. He shifted in his chair. But you've always gone above and beyond. It's one of your most valuable qualities. The audacity was almost admirable. He had systematically undermined me to secure my rightful promotion, and now he expected me to continue performing at a level that would make him look good as my superior. I leaned forward slightly. Ryan, I appreciate your concern, but I've recently been reevaluating my work-life balance. I'm sure you understand the importance of sustainable performance versus burnout. Of course, he said quickly. Absolutely. Work-life balance is crucial. I'm glad we agree. Was there anything else? He clearly had expected this conversation to go differently. Perhaps with me either displaying obvious resentment he could report, or with me recommitting to the unsustainable workload that had benefited everyone but myself. No, that's all for now, he said. My door is always open if you want to talk. I'll keep that in mind. I replied, rising to signal the end of our meeting. As I walked back to my desk, I caught Diana watching me from the break room. Her eyes quickly darted away when I noticed her. Had she been tasked with gauging my reaction to this meeting? Were they all still collaborating, still concerned about the threat I might pose? The thought should have angered me, but instead it provided a strange sort of validation. They were worried. Good. That evening, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I met with Thomas Weber, a former client who had left Meridian last year to start his own consultancy. We had maintained a friendly relationship, occasionally meeting for drinks to discuss industry trends. I was surprised to get your call, Thomas said as we settled at a corner table in a quiet bar downtown. Pleasantly surprised, but surprised nonetheless. You've always been so devoted to Meridian. Things change, I replied, taking a sip of my drink. People change, or perhaps they just reveal who they truly were all along. Thomas studied me with interest. Sounds like there's a story there. There is, but I'm more interested in hearing about your experience starting your own firm. The challenges, the unexpected hurdles, the rewards. His eyebrows rose, but he didn't press for details about my situation. That was one of the things I'd always appreciated about Thomas. He understood professional discretion. Well, it's not for the faint of heart. He began settling in. The first 6 months were terrifying. No guaranteed paycheck, no infrastructure, no team to delegate to. Just me, my laptop, and a very understanding spouse who didn't divorce me when I turned our guest bedroom into a makeshift office. For the next 2 hours, Thomas walked me through his journey. The initial client acquisition struggles, the pricing mistakes, the administrative burdens he hadn't anticipated, but also the freedom, the satisfaction of building something that reflected his values, and the profound difference between working for someone else's dream versus your own. Why do you ask? He said finally as we prepared to leave. Are you considering a change? I smiled, feeling the first genuine stirring of excitement since the promotion debacle. Let's just say I'm exploring options. Well, if you ever want to talk specifics, business plans, startup costs, client acquisition strategies, I'm happy to share what I've learned. God knows I made enough mistakes that could save someone else some pain. We parted ways with a handshake that felt like the first step on a new path. On the train ride home, I opened my phone's notes app and began typing furiously. Questions, ideas, possibilities. For the first time in a week, I felt energized rather than drained. The next morning, instead of my usual weekend routine of catching up on Meridian work, I drove to a small coffee shop in a neighborhood far from my own, where I was unlikely to run into any coworkers. I claimed a corner table, opened my laptop, and created a new document with a simple title: Mitchell Consulting, Business Plan, Draft. The name was tentative, possibly too obvious, but it sent a little thrill through me to see it in print. This wasn't just fantasy or a revenge plot anymore. This was becoming real. I spent the entire day there, moving from coffee to lunch and back to coffee again. I researched market conditions, competitive analysis, startup costs, legal structures. I drafted a mission statement that subtly addressed everything Meridian got wrong. I identified target client profiles that aligned with the underserved segments I'd noted in my late-night analysis of Meridian's gaps. By closing time, I had the skeleton of a business plan that both excited and terrified me. Could I really do this? Leave the security of my job? Strike out on my own and build something from nothing? The question haunted me as I drove home. And then, as I waited at a red light, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I glanced down to see a company-wide message from Gerald. Congratulations to Ryan Hamilton on securing the Applewood account expansion. Ryan's innovative approach has resulted in a contract that doubles our engagement with this key client. Please join me in celebrating this significant win for Meridian Solutions, the Applewood expansion. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as a car behind me honked. The light had turned green. The Applewood expansion that I had spent months laying the groundwork for. The client relationships I had carefully cultivated. The strategic approach I had developed and documented in the very files that had mysteriously gone missing from the shared drive 2 weeks before the final proposal was due. And now Ryan was receiving accolades for what was essentially my work. As I pulled into my apartment building's parking garage, any doubts about my new path evaporated. This wasn't just about seeking revenge anymore. This was about claiming what I deserved. Recognition for my abilities, compensation for my ideas, and the opportunity to build something that couldn't be stolen from me by office politics and betrayal. That night, I slept better than I had all week. My dreams filled with logos and office spaces and client meetings where I was finally in control of my own destiny. Sunday was dedicated to research of a different kind. I began compiling detailed notes on each of my coworkers, their strengths, their weaknesses, their ambitions, and most importantly, their vulnerabilities. Not in a malicious way, but with the clinical precision of someone mapping assets and liabilities. Ryan Hamilton, excellent at relationships and presentations, but relied heavily on others for technical execution. Poor attention to detail, tendency to overpromise to clients. Diana Chen, creative and talented designer, but insecure about her technical skills. Constantly sought validation. Complained about being underutilized and pigeonholed into basic design work. Jason Kemp, brilliant with data analysis but struggled with client communication. Had mentioned feeling stuck at Meridian multiple times over the past year. Monica Weller, detail-oriented project coordinator with exceptional organizational skills. Frequently expressed frustration about lack of advancement opportunities for non-managerial staff at Meridian, and so on, through each team member who had participated in my professional sabotage. I noted salary ranges based on industry standards, personal situations that might make them more or less risk-averse, and specific frustrations they had voiced about Meridian over the years. It was strange how clearly I could see these details now, freed from the fog of misplaced loyalty. These weren't just colleagues who had betrayed me. They were potential pieces on a chessboard I was just beginning to arrange. Monday morning arrived with a newfound sense of purpose. I entered the Meridian offices exactly on time, nodded pleasantly to coworkers who still seemed wary of my reaction to Ryan's promotion, and settled at my desk with the air of someone who had made peace with their circumstances. But inside, everything had changed. Each meeting was an intelligence-gathering opportunity. Each client interaction was a potential future connection. Each overheard complaint about Meridian's processes was ammunition for designing something better. "You seem weirdly zen today," Melissa commented when we grabbed coffee mid-morning. "Should I be concerned?" I smiled. "Just gaining perspective." "Perspective?" she repeated dubiously. "Is that what we're calling plotting nowadays?" I laughed, the sound surprising even me. "Not plotting, sir. Planning. There's a difference. Care to share these plans?" I hesitated. Melissa had proven herself loyal, but what I was considering would require absolute discretion in these early stages. "Not yet," I said finally. "But when the time comes, you'll be the first to know." The weeks that followed settled into a strange new rhythm. On the surface, I was the model employee. Competent, professional, punctual. I completed my assigned tasks with precision, attended required meetings with appropriate contributions, and maintained cordial relationships with everyone, including those who had undermined me. But beneath this compliant exterior, I was methodically laying the groundwork for my departure and what would come after. I began taking lunch meetings with contacts from my extensive professional network, carefully framing these conversations as casual catch-ups rather than business development. I spent evenings refining my business plan, researching potential office spaces, and connecting with former clients who had left Meridian for various reasons over the years. One such client was Eleanor Graves, CEO of Westridge Properties, who had taken her business elsewhere after feeling that Meridian had become too corporate, too impersonal in their approach. Our coffee meeting extended to nearly 2 hours as she detailed her frustrations. "They assigned us 3 different account managers in 18 months, Alex," she said, stirring her latte with evident irritation. "Every time we had to rehash our entire business model, our goals, our challenges. It was exhausting." I nodded sympathetically. Continuity of service is crucial for complex client relationships. It's something I've always believed strongly in. "You were the one bright spot when we worked with Meridian," she said, eyeing me thoughtfully. "Always prepared, always seemed to actually care about our outcomes rather than just billable hours." "That's kind of you to say." She set down her spoon deliberately. "So why are we really having coffee, Alex? Not that it isn't lovely to catch up, but I sense there's more to this meeting than professional courtesy." I appreciated her directness. It was one of the qualities that had made her a favorite client. "You're right," I admitted. "I'm exploring some professional changes. Nothing concrete yet, but I'm considering options that would allow me to work with clients in the way I believe is most effective." Her eyebrows rose. "Are you leaving Meridian?" "Hypothetically," I said carefully. "If I were to establish my own consultancy focused on personalized service, customized solutions, and consistent client relationships, would that be of interest to Westridge?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. "Send me a proposal the minute you're operational, and we'll be your first client meeting." I felt a surge of adrenaline at her words. This wasn't just revenge fantasy anymore. This was becoming viable. "I should be clear," I said, not wanting to mislead her. "This is still in the planning stages. I haven't given notice or taken any irreversible steps." "Well, when you do," she replied, pulling out her business card and writing something on the back, "call my direct line." "I mean it, Alex. Westridge would be very interested in working with you directly." I tucked the card into my wallet, feeling as though I'd just secured my first client before my business even existed. Similar conversations over the following weeks yielded comparable results. Not everyone was as enthusiastic as Eleanor, but enough expressed interest to make my plan seem increasingly practical rather than merely cathartic. At Meridian, meanwhile, the consequences of my strategic withdrawal from above and beyond contributions were becoming increasingly apparent. Projects that had once flowed smoothly now hit unexpected snags. Questions that I would have preemptively answered now resulted in frantic, last-minute scrambles. Client relationships that I had quietly maintained through personal attention began to show signs of strain. Ryan called more frequent check-in meetings with me, his frustration barely concealed beneath a veneer of collaborative concern. "The Deerfield presentation has some serious gaps," he said during one such meeting, sliding the printed deck across the conference table to me. "This isn't up to our usual standards." I reviewed the slides with deliberate slowness. "I believe I completed the sections assigned to me according to the brief," I replied, flipping to the relevant pages. "These market analysis segments reflect the data we had available. But you normally would have done additional research to fill in these knowledge gaps." He persisted. "You would have anticipated these questions before the client could ask them." I closed the deck and slid it back across the table. "That sounds like a senior project manager responsibility now, doesn't it? I'm sure you'll handle it admirably." His jaw tightened. We both knew what was happening. I was doing exactly what my job description specified. No more, no less. All the invisible labor that had made others look good, that had kept projects on track and clients happy, had been withdrawn. And the infrastructure of Meridian was beginning to creak under the strain of its absence. "Is this how it's going to be now?" Ryan asked, dropping the professional pretense momentarily. "You doing the bare minimum out of spite?" I met his gaze steadily. "I'm fulfilling all my contractual obligations to this company. If you feel my performance isn't meeting expectations, I encourage you to document your concerns through the proper channels." He wouldn't, of course. Documenting would require specifying exactly what additional work he expected from me. work that wasn't technically my responsibility, and that would reveal how much the team had relied on my uncompensated efforts. "That won't be necessary," he said finally. "I just thought we were past this awkwardness about the promotion." "There's no awkwardness, Ryan," I replied, standing to signal the end of our meeting. "Just clarity about roles and responsibilities." "Was there anything else?" He shook his head, frustration evident in every line of his body. As I walked back to my desk, I passed Diana's workspace where she was frantically trying to update client materials for a presentation scheduled for the following morning. Work that had been assigned to her with unreasonable deadlines because Ryan had failed to account for the production time I would have automatically built into the schedule. "Need any help?" I asked, pausing at her desk. Hope flashed across her face before she remembered her role in my professional sabotage. "No," she said quickly. "I'm fine. Just a tight deadline. Those seem to be happening more frequently lately." I observed neutrally. She glanced around to ensure no one was listening. "Everything's a rush job now. No one plans ahead. It's like the whole system is falling apart." I nodded sympathetically. "Sounds stressful. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Within my role parameters, of course." As I continued to my desk, I could feel her gaze following me. The smallest seed of doubt had been planted. That evening, I took a significant step forward in my plan. I consulted with a business attorney recommended by Thomas Weber about the legalities of starting my own firm. We discussed non-compete clauses. Meridian's was surprisingly weak and likely unenforceable, client solicitation limitations, and intellectual property considerations. "Based on what you've shown me," the attorney said, reviewing my employment contract, "you're on solid legal ground as long as you don't take proprietary materials or actively solicit clients while still employed. Once you've resigned, you're free to compete in the marketplace." It was the confirmation I needed. I could build my own business without fear of legal repercussions from Meridian. The next phase involved securing financing. While my savings were substantial, living modestly and investing consistently for 5 years had its advantages. I wanted a cushion that would allow me to establish a professional office space and weather the inevitable slow period of a new business launch. I scheduled meetings with 3 different banks, prepared comprehensive business plans and financial projections for each, and was approved for a business loan that exceeded my expectations. The loan officer at the third bank had actually worked with Meridian years ago and remembered me. "Your reputation precedes you, Alex," she said as she processed my application. "If anyone can make a new consultancy work in this competitive marketplace, it's you." By the end of the month, I had accomplished the foundational work needed for my departure. Legal consultation, financial backing, preliminary client interest, and a clear business model that addressed the specific weaknesses I'd identified in Meridian's approach. What I hadn't yet decided was exactly how and when to execute the most crucial part of my plan, hiring my former coworkers. The idea had crystallized gradually as I'd observed the mounting dysfunction at Meridian. Ryan's promotion had created a leadership vacuum that he was ill-equipped to fill. Team members were increasingly frustrated. Clients were noticing the decline in service quality, and the collaborative atmosphere that had once been Meridian's strength was deteriorating into a culture of blame and defensiveness. The perfect conditions for a strategic talent acquisition. Not just any talent, the very people who had conspired against me. The irony was exquisite, but this wasn't just about poetic justice. Each of these individuals, despite their betrayal, possessed skills that would be valuable to my new venture. And each had weaknesses that I understood intimately. Weaknesses that would make them dependent on the structure and leadership I planned to provide. The question was not if, but when and how to approach them. Too soon, and I risked word getting back to Gerald before I was ready. Too late, and they might find other opportunities as Meridian's environment worsened. I decided to begin with the most disillusioned and least loyal to Ryan, Monica. Our opportunity came during a particularly chaotic week when Ryan had failed to properly scope a major project, resulting in everyone working late to meet an impossible deadline. I found Monica in the small kitchen, aggressively stabbing at the buttons on the malfunctioning coffee machine at 7:30 p.m. "Here," I said, gently moving her aside to apply the specific sequence of button presses that mysteriously made the ancient machine cooperate. "It requires a special touch." "Thanks," she sighed as the machine finally began brewing. One would think a successful company could afford a coffee maker manufactured in this decade. "One would think," I agreed mildly, leaning against the counter. "Long night ahead?" She rubbed her eyes. "At this rate, I'll be lucky to leave by midnight." All because someone didn't bother to check the client's actual requirements before promising the moon and stars. I nodded sympathetically. It's becoming a pattern. It's becoming unbearable, she corrected, lowering her voice. This place has changed, Alex, and not for the better. Have you considered looking elsewhere? I asked casually, as though the thought had just occurred to me. She laughed bitterly. Every single day for the past 3 weeks. But the job market is tight and starting over somewhere new. She shrugged. The devil you know, right? Sometimes the unknown isn't as frightening as we imagine, I offered, especially when the known becomes increasingly problematic. The coffee machine finished its cycle with a hiss. Monica poured herself a cup and added cream, considering my words. You thinking of leaving? She asked finally, the question direct but her tone cautious. I took a measured sip of my own coffee before responding. I'm considering options that would allow me to work according to my own standards, with my own carefully selected team. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she processed my phrasing. Your own? Are you starting something, Alex? I glanced around to ensure we were still alone in the kitchen. Hypothetically, I said quietly, if I were to establish my own consultancy that addressed everything that's gone wrong here, would that be a conversation you'd be interested in having? Strictly hypothetically, of course. Monica studied me for a long moment, calculation evident in her expression. She had participated in my sabotage, yes, but she had also been one of the first to recognize the consequences of Ryan's leadership. Hypothetically, she replied finally, I would very much like to have that conversation. When the time is right, I nodded. Good to know. Hypothetically, we returned to our respective desks. Nothing outwardly changed, but I had secured my first potential recruit and, more importantly, planted the idea that alternatives to Meridian existed, specifically an alternative led by me. Over the next 2 weeks, I had similar subtle conversations with Jason and Diana, gauging their frustration levels and hinting at future possibilities without making explicit offers. Both expressed interest, though Diana was more hesitant, likely due to her closer relationship with Ryan. The dominoes were aligning. My business registration paperwork was filed. I had secured a lease on a modest but impressive office space beginning the following month. I had verbal commitments from 3 former Meridian clients ready to sign contracts once I was officially operational. All that remained was to tender my resignation and set the final phase in motion. I chose my moment carefully. The Monday following Meridian's quarterly review, where the decline in client satisfaction scores had been impossible to ignore. Gerald had spent most of the meeting shooting anxious glances at Ryan, whose explanations for the downturn had grown increasingly defensive and hollow. I knocked on Gerald's office door at precisely 4:30 p.m., late enough that most major decisions for the day would be complete, but not so late that he would be rushing to leave. Alex, he greeted me, looking up from his computer with mild surprise. Our interactions had been minimal since Ryan's promotion. What can I do for you? I closed the door behind me and took a seat across from his desk, placing a sealed envelope between us. I wanted to deliver this personally, I said, watching as understanding dawned on his face. My formal resignation, effective 2 weeks from today. Gerald stared at the envelope but didn't touch it immediately. I see, he said finally. May I ask why? Is this about the promotion? Because if so, I want you to know there will be other opportunities. It's not about the promotion, I interrupted smoothly, at least not directly. I've decided to pursue an independent venture that aligns more closely with my professional values and goals. He frowned slightly. Independent venture? You're starting your own business? I nodded. A boutique consultancy focused on personalized client relationships and integrated solution delivery. I see, he repeated, his expression darkening as he processed the competitive implications. And might I ask if you're planning to approach Meridian clients? I haven't solicited any clients while employed here, I said truthfully. Once my resignation is effective, I'll be competing in the open marketplace, like any other business. I'm sure you understand. Gerald's fingers drummed nervously on his desk. This is unexpected. Is it? I asked, allowing a hint of challenge into my tone. The quarterly results seem to suggest that Meridian's current direction may not be optimal for client retention. I'm simply creating an alternative that addresses what I perceive as marketplace needs. He picked up the envelope finally, turning it over in his hands as though it might contain something other than the standard resignation letter. You've been with us 5 years, Alex. A valued team member. I hope you'll complete your projects responsibly during this transition period. Of course, I replied. I've prepared detailed handover documentation for all my current work. I wouldn't want to leave the team in a difficult position. The irony of my statement hung in the air between us. We both knew that my departure, no matter how well documented my handover, would create significant challenges for Meridian. "Well," Gerald said finally, "I wish you success in your new endeavor. Though I hope you understand if I don't actively help you recruit our clients or staff." I smiled politely as I stood. "I wouldn't expect you to. Thank you for the opportunities Meridian has provided." They've been instructive. As I turned to leave, Gerald called after me. "Does Ryan know about this?" "Not yet," I replied without turning back. "I thought it appropriate to inform you first." The news of my resignation spread through the office like wildfire. By morning, everyone knew not only that I was leaving, but that I was starting a competing business. The reactions were fascinating to observe. Ryan oscillated between dismissive bravado, good luck competing against an established firm with no team or client base, and thinly veiled anxiety, evidenced by the emergency team meeting he called to discuss continuity planning for my departure. Monica, Jason, and Diana maintained professional poker faces in public, but found opportunities to speak with me privately, asking increasingly specific questions about my timeline and plans. Melissa, who had somehow maintained our friendship despite the office politics, cornered me in the stairwell. "You're actually doing it," she said, sounding impressed. "Creating your own company to compete directly with these backstabbing corporate climbers. It's brilliant. It's a business decision," I replied modestly. "Meridian has created market gaps that I intend to fill." "Bullshit," she laughed. "This is the most elegant revenge I've ever witnessed. You're not just leaving, you're building something that exposes exactly how much this place needed you." I allowed a small smile. "There may be an element of personal satisfaction involved." "So," she said, lowering her voice, "when are you going to offer me a job? Because there's no way I'm staying on this sinking ship once you're gone." I hadn't planned to approach Melissa so directly. She was one of the few who hadn't participated in my sabotage, making her less integral to my specific revenge. But her skills were undeniable, and her loyalty had been proven. "Are you serious about considering a move?" I asked. "It would mean taking a risk on a startup with no guarantees." "Alex," she said firmly, "I've watched you methodically excel at everything you've touched for years. If you're building a company, I want in on the ground floor. Besides," she added with a wry smile, "working for someone who values competence over office politics sounds refreshingly civilized." "In that case," I replied, "I'd be very interested in discussing a senior role for you. Perhaps over dinner this weekend? I can share the business plan and propose compensation structure." "It's a date," she agreed. "A strictly professional, potentially life-changing date." As my 2-week notice period progressed, I maintained impeccable professionalism. I documented all my processes, transitioned my projects with comprehensive handovers, and even trained my replacement, a nervous new hire who clearly sensed she was being set up for failure. What I didn't do was correct any of the foundational issues I'd previously managed behind the scenes. The scheduling conflicts I would have quietly resolved, the client expectations I would have tactfully managed, the interdepartmental communications I would have facilitated, all were left to find their natural, chaotic conclusions. By my final day, the contrast between Meridian with my invisible support and Meridian without it was becoming painfully apparent to everyone. 3 major clients had escalated concerns about project delays. The quarterly forecast was showing alarming gaps, and team morale had plummeted as Ryan's leadership style devolved from collaborative to increasingly authoritarian in a desperate attempt to maintain control. My farewell gathering was an awkward affair. Gerald made a stiff speech about new opportunities and remaining friends in a competitive industry. Ryan presented me with a company plaque that misspelled my last name. Coworkers who had actively participated in my sabotage now offered effusive good wishes that rang hollow in the conference room. I accepted it all with gracious smiles and vague statements about valuing the experience and looking forward to new challenges. What I didn't mention was that I had scheduled meetings with Monica, Jason, and Diana for the week following my departure, or that Melissa had already accepted a position as my operations director, effective immediately after her own notice period. As I packed my personal items into a cardboard box, the ritual humiliation of corporate departure, Ryan approached my desk. "No hard feelings, right?" he said, watching me wrap a frame certification in bubble wrap. "It's just business after all." I carefully placed the wrap frame in my box before responding. "Of course," I agreed pleasantly. "Just business. He shifted uncomfortably. Some of us are grabbing drinks at Harlow's if you want to join. A proper send-off. Thank you for the invitation. I replied, but I have a meeting with my commercial real estate agent about my new office space. Perhaps another time. The mention of my concrete business preparations seemed to unsettle him. The reality of my competing venture was becoming less theoretical by the day. Well, good luck, he said, extending his hand. Not many people successfully launch a competitive business in this space. The barriers to entry are significant. I shook his hand firmly. I've always enjoyed a challenge, and I've had excellent training in identifying market opportunities. As we released hands, I added casually, by the way, you might want to check the Applewood contract renewal. I believe there's a notification clause that requires action by the end of this month. His expression flickered with alarm. He had clearly forgotten this critical deadline for one of Meridian's largest clients. Right, he said quickly. Of course, I have that on my calendar. Excellent, I smiled. Then everything should be fine. But we both knew it wouldn't be. The Applewood relationship had been maintained largely through my personal attention to their specific concerns and preferences. Details that were documented nowhere except in my institutional knowledge. Now walking out the door, I picked up my box and made my final exit from Meridian Solutions. 5 years of employment ending with a security escort to the elevators. Standard procedure for departing employees, but symbolic nonetheless. As the elevator doors closed on my former workplace, I felt a profound sense of completion. Phase 1 was complete. I had identified the betrayal, processed my emotional response, and methodically prepared my exit strategy. Phase 2, building my competing business, was already underway. My office space was secured, my business registration complete, my initial client meeting scheduled. And Phase 3, the systematic recruitment of the very people who had undermined me, was about to begin. The real revenge wouldn't be found in dramatic confrontations or exposed conspiracies. It would unfold gradually as I built something superior to what they had protected so jealously, and as they eventually came to work for me, not as equals, but as employees grateful for the opportunity. One by one, they would come to depend on me for their livelihoods, their professional advancement, their financial security. The same people who had conspired to keep me from leadership would find themselves under my direct authority, not through coercion or manipulation, but through the natural consequences of their own actions and my strategic response. As I stepped out into the bright spring afternoon, I allowed myself a genuine smile for the first time in months. This wasn't the end of a career. It was the beginning of something much more satisfying. Justice served cold and profitable. The week after my departure from Meridian was a whirlwind of activity. I officially opened Mitchell Strategic Consulting in a modest but impressive office space in a renovated industrial building downtown. The exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, and abundant natural light created exactly the image I wanted. Innovative, authentic, and distinct from Meridian's sterile corporate environment. I had meetings with 5 potential clients, 3 of whom signed contracts on the spot. 2 others requested formal proposals, which I prepared and delivered within 48 hours, demonstrating the responsive service that would become our hallmark. Melissa worked remotely during her notice period at Meridian, helping to establish our operational systems and client onboarding processes. Our daily calls included updates not just on business development, but on the rapidly deteriorating situation she was witnessing firsthand. It's chaos, she reported during one evening call. The Applewood renewal deadline was missed, just as you anticipated. They're furious and threatening to pull their entire account. How is Ryan handling it? I asked, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from my voice. Blaming everyone but himself. He called an all-hands meeting to lecture the team about attention to detail and client relationship management. The irony was painful. And Gerald? Panic mode. He's trying to salvage the Applewood relationship personally, but they're demanding to know why you're no longer on their account. Apparently, no one bothered to inform them that their primary contact had left the company. I allowed myself a small smile. This wasn't manufactured chaos. It was simply the natural consequence of removing the systems and support I had quietly provided for years. Like pulling out a critical support beam and watching the structure begin to sway. How are our potential recruits responding? I asked. Melissa's voice lowered, though she was speaking from her home. Monica is ready to jump ship immediately. Jason is increasingly frustrated but cautious about making a move. Diana's torn. She and Ryan have some personal connection I can't quite figure out. But even she's beginning to question his leadership. Perfect. I replied. Let's proceed with the individual meetings as planned. The following day, I met Monica for coffee at a quiet cafe far from the Meridian offices. She arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in a sharp blazer as though this were a formal interview rather than an exploratory conversation. Thank you for meeting me. I began once we were settled with our drinks. Let's skip the pleasantries, she said, leaning forward intently. I want to know exactly what you're building and where I might fit in it. Her directness was refreshing and confirmed my assessment of her as a valuable first recruit. I'm building a consultancy that addresses everything Meridian gets wrong. I explained, client-centered rather than profit-centered, collaborative rather than hierarchical, transparent rather than political. I slid a folder across the table containing my business plan, organizational chart, and a specific job description, Director of Client Services. This role would report directly to me, I continued as she skimmed the documents. Full autonomy over client delivery processes, staff allocation, and quality assurance. Salary 20% above your current compensation, with performance bonuses and equity options after 1 year. Monica looked up from the folder, her expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. This is generous, especially for a startup. I'm investing in talent, I replied simply, and in people who understand both what excellence looks like and what dysfunctional leadership costs an organization. She closed the folder carefully. Why me, Alex? Let's be honest. I wasn't exactly supportive during the promotion situation. I believed what Ryan told me about you, and I didn't verify before forming judgments. That's not exactly a recommendation for a Director of Client Services position. I appreciated her candor. It would make what came next more effective. That's precisely why you're valuable to me, I said. You've experienced firsthand how toxic misinformation can become in a corporate environment. You've seen the consequences of poor leadership. And most importantly, you've demonstrated the capacity to recognize when you've been misled and to reassess based on new evidence. I leaned forward slightly. I don't need blind loyalty, Monica. I need intelligent discernment. You made a mistake in judgment based on deliberately manipulated information. What matters is how quickly you recognize that mistake once you had better data. Her posture relaxed slightly. And the others? Are you planning to recruit the entire Meridian team? Not everyone, I said carefully. Only those with both the skills we need and the capacity to thrive in a merit-based environment. Including Ryan? She asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. I smiled. Everyone's situation will be evaluated individually based on their unique skills and circumstances. Monica studied me for a long moment, then reopened the folder and tapped the compensation page. I want 30% above my current salary, not 20. And equity options available after 6 months, not a year. 25% increase, equity options at 9 months. I countered smoothly. She extended her hand across the table. When can I start? By the end of the week, I had secured commitments from both Monica and Jason, with start dates staggered 2 weeks apart. Diana remained hesitant, but had agreed to a second conversation the following week. Melissa had submitted her resignation at Meridian and would join Mitchell Strategic Consulting full-time in 14 days. The pieces were falling into place with a precision that felt almost predestined. But I knew better. This wasn't fate. It was careful planning and strategic execution. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly word would spread about my new venture. Former clients began reaching out proactively, having heard through industry channels about my departure from Meridian. Competitors made discreet inquiries about potential partnerships or resource sharing. And most surprisingly, Gerald himself requested a meeting. We met at a steakhouse downtown, the kind of neutral territory chosen for diplomatic negotiations between potentially hostile parties. Gerald arrived in a sharper suit than his usual office attire, his demeanor oscillating between defensive and conciliatory. You've been busy, he opened after we'd ordered drinks. 3 weeks out and already making waves in the industry. I offered a modest shrug. The market was ready for something different. Something different, he repeated, swirling his scotch. Is that what we're calling aggressive client acquisition and staff poaching these days? I haven't violated any non-compete clauses, I replied calmly. And professionals are free to seek employment wherever they choose. Gerald set down his glass with slightly more force than necessary. Let's be direct, Alex. Are you deliberately targeting Meridian? Is this about the promotion? The question revealed so much about Gerald's perspective. He still saw this as a personal vendetta rather than a strategic business move, which, to be fair, wasn't entirely incorrect, though far more calculated than he imagined. This is about recognizing an opportunity, I said. Meridian has chosen a particular direction under its current leadership. I'm offering an alternative approach that some clients and professionals find compelling. Simple market dynamics. He leaned forward. What would it take to end this? Competition? To find a more collaborative solution? Are you offering to acquire my company, Gerald? I asked, genuinely surprised by this turn. I'm exploring options, he replied carefully. Meridian has resources that your startup lacks. Perhaps there's a mutually beneficial arrangement to be found. I considered his implicit offer. It was tempting, a rapid validation of what I'd built, potentially at a significant premium. But it would undermine the true purpose of my venture. I appreciate the interest, I said finally, but Mitchell's Strategic Consulting isn't for sale. We're just getting started. Gerald's expression hardened slightly. You should understand that starting a business is very different from working within an established firm. The failure rate for new consultancies is extraordinarily high. Meridian could weather a few lost clients and staff transitions. Can your fledgling operation survive a prolonged, competitive response? The threat was thinly veiled, but it lacked teeth. Gerald knew as well as I did that Meridian was already struggling to maintain service quality with their existing clients. A competitive response would stretch their limited resources even thinner. I believe in letting market forces determine outcomes, I replied evenly. Don't you? He signaled for the check without ordering dinner. I hope you know what you're doing, Alex. This industry can be unforgiving to those who overestimate their importance. A lesson many are learning firsthand. I agreed, meeting his gaze steadily. As Gerald departed, leaving his drink half finished, I remained at the table, considering the implications of our conversation. His approach confirmed what I had suspected. Meridian was feeling the impact of my departure and subsequent actions far more acutely than I had dared to hope. The following Monday, Diana finally agreed to meet me for lunch. She chose a restaurant close to Meridian's offices, suggesting she didn't want her meeting with me to remain secret. Interesting. I'll be direct, she said shortly after we'd ordered. Ryan says you're deliberately trying to destroy Meridian by targeting its key personnel and clients. And what do you think? I asked, curious about her perspective. She hesitated. I think you're building something new and responding to opportunities, but I also think there's an element of settlement of accounts involved. I smiled appreciatively at her insight. That's a fair assessment, though I prefer to think of it as market correction rather than settling accounts. The job offer for me, she said, getting to the heart of the matter. Is it real? Or am I just a pawn in whatever game you're playing with Meridian? The offer is genuine, I assured her. Your design work has always been exceptional, Diana. Your ability to translate complex concepts into visual narratives is rare and valuable. I'm building a company where that talent would be central, not peripheral. She looked down at her plate. I helped Ryan alter your presentation slides before the promotion decision, she admitted quietly. He said it was just a practical joke, that the errors were obvious enough that you'd catch them before the presentation. When you didn't, he let them stand. I finished for her, and you didn't correct the record. No, she acknowledged. I didn't. I convinced myself it wasn't that significant, that you would have other opportunities, that loyalty to the team meant supporting Ryan's advancement. Her candor was unexpected but welcome. It confirmed what I had suspected about her involvement. She had been a tool rather than an architect of my sabotage. We all make decisions based on incomplete information, I said. What matters is what we do when we gain clarity. And now, she asked, looking up, with clarity, what decision would you make about someone who had participated in undermining you, however peripherally? It was the question at the heart of my entire plan, not just for Diana but for all of them. With clarity, I replied carefully, I would recognize that people are more complex than their worst decisions. That talent deserves opportunity even when trust requires rebuilding. And that sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't exclusion, but inclusion on new and better terms. Diana studied me for a long moment. You've changed, Alex. I've evolved. I corrected gently. Clarity has that effect. By the time our lunch concluded, Diana had tentatively agreed to consider my offer, though she requested a week to make her final decision. Her hesitation stemmed less from loyalty to Meridian than from uncertainty about my true intentions, a reasonable concern given the circumstances. As the weeks progressed, Mitchell's Strategic Consulting grew with remarkable speed. We secured office space on a second floor of our building to accommodate our expanding team. Monica seamlessly took over client service operations, immediately implementing improvements to project management processes that I had long advocated for at Meridian. Jason revolutionized our data analytics capabilities, creating visualization tools that our clients found invaluable for decision-making. Melissa proved herself an exceptional operations director, establishing systems and workflows that allowed us to scale efficiently without sacrificing quality. Diana eventually joined as our creative director, bringing with her not just her design talents, but also 2 junior designers who had become disillusioned with Meridian's creative constraints. 3 months after my departure from Meridian, we had a team of 11 professionals, a client roster that included 5 former Meridian accounts and 7 new businesses, and a reputation for delivering exceptional results with unprecedented responsiveness. Through industry channels, we heard that Meridian was struggling. The Applewood account had indeed been lost, along with 2 other major clients. Staff turnover had accelerated, with several departures beyond those I had specifically recruited. Gerald had been forced to bring in an efficiency consultant to identify operational issues that had been largely masked by my behind-the-scenes problem-solving for years. Ryan's position as senior project manager was increasingly precarious. Client complaints about missed deadlines and communication failures had reached executive levels. His leadership style, once praised as dynamic and decisive, was now described as erratic and defensive. The stage was set for the final phase of my plan. "Is it time?" Melissa asked during our weekly strategy meeting, the question loaded with meaning beyond its simple words. I nodded. "I believe it is. Send the invitation." The following day, Ryan received a carefully worded email from Melissa, requesting a meeting to discuss potential synergies between our organizations. Vague enough to pique curiosity, professional enough to seem legitimate, his response came surprisingly quickly. Not interested in collaborating with competitors who undermine established business relationships, I hadn't expected him to accept immediately. His pride would demand at least a show of resistance, but circumstances would soon force reconsideration of his position. 1 week later, industry news reported that Meridian Solutions had lost the Davidson account, their largest remaining client and Ryan's personal responsibility. The client had cited systematic failures in project execution and communication as the reason for their departure. The day after this announcement, Ryan's LinkedIn profile was quietly updated to remove Senior Project Manager from his current position, reverting to his previous title of Project Manager. A demotion, however, carefully disguised. "Now?" Melissa asked when I showed her the update. "Now," I confirmed, "but not from us directly. The approach needs to come from someone he still trusts." Diana was the obvious choice. Despite joining Mitchell Strategic Consulting, she had maintained cordial relationships with several Meridian employees, including Ryan. Their personal connection, whatever its nature, hadn't been completely severed by her departure. She was hesitant when I proposed the idea. "You want me to reach out to Ryan? To offer him a job here? After everything he did?" "Not exactly," I clarified. "I want you to check on him, colleague to former colleague. Express concern about the Davidson situation. Mention casually that we've been discussing expanding our project management team. And if he expresses interest, then you suggest a discreet conversation with me. No commitments, no formal interview, just exploration of possibilities." Diana's discomfort was evident. "This feels manipulative, Alex." "It's so strategic," I corrected. "Ryan made specific choices that affected my career trajectory. I'm making specific choices that could affect his. The difference is that my offer will be transparent and based on his actual skills, not on undermining others." She wasn't entirely convinced, but she agreed to make the initial contact. 2 days later, she reported back with unexpected news. "He cried," she said, her own voice tinged with surprise. "Actually broke down during our coffee meeting. Said everything at Meridian is falling apart, that Gerald blames him for the client losses, that he's being sidelined from key decisions." I hadn't anticipated such a dramatic emotional response. Ryan had always projected an image of confident control, even arrogance. To hear that he had crumbled so completely was momentarily satisfying, but ultimately sobering. "Did you mention the potential opportunity here?" I asked. Diana nodded. "He laughed at first. Thought I was joking. When he realized I was serious, he got very quiet, then asked if you were behind the offer." "And your response?" I told him the truth, that we've been discussing additional project management capacity and that despite personal history, you evaluate talent objectively. I considered this development. Ryan's emotional state suggested he was more vulnerable than I had anticipated, potentially more malleable as well. The question was whether this changed my approach. "Did he express interest in meeting?" I asked finally. "Yes," Diana confirmed. but he's afraid it might be a setup for public humiliation. He's worried you want to get him in a room just to reject him, to complete some kind of revenge cycle. The fact that Ryan could imagine such a scenario revealed much about how he would have handled the situation if our positions were reversed. It was a reminder of the fundamental difference in our characters, and why my revenge approach was ultimately more satisfying than any public confrontation could have been. Tell him I'm willing to meet at a neutral location of his choosing, I instructed. No HR representatives, no formal interview panel. Just a conversation between professionals about potential opportunities. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. I arrived early, secured a corner table with privacy, and waited with a strange sense of culmination. This moment represented the intersection of meticulous planning and unpredictable human emotion. A fascinating alchemy. Ryan arrived 7 minutes late, his appearance noticeably different from his Meridian days. The crisp suits and perfectly styled hair had given way to business casual attire and a slightly disheveled look. The confidence in his stride was diminished, his shoulders hunched slightly as though carrying an invisible weight. "Alex," he said as he slid into the seat across from me, "thank you for agreeing to meet. Thank you for considering the conversation." I replied neutrally, "Can I order you a coffee?" The initial pleasantries were strained but necessary. A thin veneer of professionalism over the complex history between us. Eventually, we progressed to the matter at hand. "Diana mentioned you might have an opening," Ryan said, his tone carefully calibrated to sound casual rather than desperate. "Mitchell's strategic consulting is growing rapidly," I confirmed. "We're expanding our project management capacity to accommodate new client acquisitions. And you're considering me?" Despite everything, I had rehearsed this moment, considering various approaches ranging from coldly professional to explicitly acknowledging our history. In the end, I chose direct honesty. "I'm considering you because you possess specific skills that could be valuable to our organization," I said. "Your ability to build client relationships is strong. Your presentation skills are excellent. Your strategic thinking, when applied constructively, is an asset." I paused, then added, "Our history complicates things, certainly. But business decisions should ultimately be based on value creation, not personal grievances." Ryan's eyes, which had brightened at the positive assessment of his skills, now narrowed slightly. "This isn't some elaborate setup. Get me to leave Meridian, then fire me a month later. That would be short-sighted and petty," I replied, neither of which are traits I cultivate in myself or my organization. He seemed to accept this, though wariness remained. What exactly would the role entail? I outlined the position. Project manager, focused on specific client categories, reporting to Monica as Director of Client Services, with clear performance metrics and advancement opportunities. "Reporting to Monica?" he repeated, the hierarchical implications clearly registering. "Yes," I confirmed without elaboration. "Our organizational structure is designed to optimize client service delivery. Monica has proven exceptionally capable in her leadership role." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The woman who had once been his ally in undermining me would now be his direct supervisor. It was a reversal that required no comment to be felt fully. "And the compensation?" he asked, moving past the uncomfortable realization. I slid a document across the table detailing the salary, benefits, and performance bonus structure, deliberately set at exactly 5% below his current Meridian compensation. "This is less than I'm making now," he noted, a hint of his old entitlement surfacing. "It is," I acknowledged. "It reflects the reality that you would be joining a newer organization, albeit one with strong growth potential. The performance bonuses could ultimately exceed your current compensation, but they would need to be earned through demonstrable client satisfaction and project success." The message was clear. This wasn't a lateral move or a promotion. It was a chance at redemption, but one that would require humility and genuine performance. Ryan was silent for a long moment, examining the document and visibly processing the implications of this potential career shift. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its defensive edge. "Why would you do this, Alex? Offer me a position after what happened? You must know about my role in everything." It was the closest he had come to acknowledging his actions directly. Not quite an apology, but an opening for honest conversation. "I have several reasons," I said carefully. "Some practical. You do have valuable skills that could benefit our clients. Some strategic. Your knowledge of Meridian's processes and client relationships provides useful market intelligence." I met his gaze directly. "And some reasons are more fiery philosophical." I believe people should be judged by their capacity for growth rather than solely by their past mistakes, even significant ones. That's unexpectedly generous, he said, doubt evident in his tone. It's not generosity, I corrected. It's pragmatism. Holding grudges consumes energy better directed toward building something valuable. Mitchell's strategic consulting isn't about getting even with Meridian or anyone who worked there. It's about creating something better. This wasn't entirely true, of course. The enterprise had begun as an instrument of revenge. But somewhere in the process of building it, the company had become more than that. A genuine expression of my business philosophy and leadership approach. I'll need time to consider the offer, Ryan said finally. Of course. The document includes a deadline for decision, 2 weeks from today. Should you accept, we would require 4 weeks' notice to your current employer to ensure an ethical transition. As we concluded our meeting, Ryan extended his hand across the table. The same gesture he had made on my last day at Meridian, but now with dramatically different power dynamics. Regardless of my decision, he said as we shook hands, I owe you an apology, Alex. What happened with the promotion? It wasn't right. I was so focused on advancing that I didn't consider the ethical implications of my actions. It wasn't a full accounting of his betrayal, but it was more acknowledgement than I had expected. In that moment, I realized that the most satisfying aspect of my revenge wasn't the potential of having Ryan work under my authority. It was seeing this recognition in his eyes. The understanding that I had built something stronger from the ruins of his sabotage. We all make choices, I replied simply. What matters is what we learn from them. As Ryan walked away from our meeting, his posture slightly straighter than when he'd arrived, I remained at the table contemplating the journey that had brought us to this point. From the shock of betrayal to the methodical construction of a response. From emotional devastation to strategic empowerment. 10 days later, Ryan accepted the position at Mitchell Strategic Consulting. 3 weeks after that, Gerald called to request another meeting, this time to discuss Meridian's interest in a potential acquisition of my rapidly growing company. I declined politely, explaining that we were not seeking acquisition at this time. 6 months after my abrupt departure from Meridian Solutions, Mitchell Strategic Consulting had 32 employees, including 15 former Meridian staff, a client roster that generated revenue exceeding my most optimistic projections, and industry recognition as an innovative disruptor in the consulting space. Meridian, meanwhile, had downsized to a smaller office space and was rumored to be seeking a merger with a larger firm to remain viable. I stood at the window of my corner office watching the sunset paint the city skyline in hues of gold and amber. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Ryan's first client presentation went surprisingly well. The Westridge team specifically mentioned how much they appreciated his collaborative approach. Monica thinks he might actually work out. I smiled as I typed my response. People rise or fall according to the expectations and environment around them. We've created the conditions for success. It was true. The revenge I had engineered wasn't about destroying Ryan or anyone else who had betrayed me. It was about creating a system where merit was rewarded, where political maneuvering was rendered ineffective, and where I controlled the rules of engagement. They now worked for me, their careers and livelihoods dependent on my business success. But more importantly, they worked within a structure I had designed specifically to prevent the kind of betrayal I had experienced. Transparent performance metrics, clear advancement criteria, regular feedback mechanisms, collaborative rather than competitive incentives. I had not only survived their sabotage, I had used it as the foundation to build something far more valuable than the promotion they had denied me. The complete revenge wasn't in their subjugation. It was in creating a world where their best option for professional success was playing by my rules, in my company, under my leadership. As I turned away from the window to review the business development strategy for the coming quarter, I felt not the cold satisfaction of vengeance, but the warmer, more sustainable contentment of justice served through excellence. They had tried to define my worth through denial and betrayal. I had redefined success entirely, and in doing so, I had won something far greater than they had ever thought to take from me. 1 year into my new venture, Mitchell Strategic Consulting had become the success story of our industry. Our client roster had expanded to include multinational corporations that Meridian had unsuccessfully courted for years. Our staff had grown to 48 professionals, each carefully selected not just for their technical skills, but for their alignment with the collaborative culture I'd meticulously cultivated. and our reputation for excellence had spread far beyond our regional market, bringing inquiries from potential clients across the country. The sweet satisfaction of success was made even sweeter by the knowledge that it had been built from the ashes of betrayal. Yet something unexpected had happened along the way. My revenge had evolved into something more meaningful than I had initially envisioned. What had begun as a calculated response to sabotage had transformed into a genuine mission to create the consultancy I had always believed possible, one where merit trumped politics, where collaboration defeated backstabbing, and where excellence was the only currency that truly mattered. Standing in our newly expanded offices, watching my team, my company, in action, I felt a complex mixture of pride, vindication, and something I hadn't anticipated: responsibility. These people, including those who had once conspired against me, now depended on me not just for their paychecks, but for their professional fulfillment. Their families, their mortgages, their futures were now intertwined with the success of my vision. Quite a view, isn't it? Melissa said, joining me at the glass wall overlooking our main workspace. As operations director, she had been instrumental in translating my strategic vision into functional reality. From betrayed employee to respected CEO in 12 months, her tone carried a hint of well-earned smugness on my behalf. I nodded, watching as Monica led a strategy session in one of the glass-walled conference rooms, her confident gestures visible even from a distance. Ryan sat among the team members, contributing but notably not dominating, a significant evolution from his behavior at Meridian. Did you ever imagine it would grow this fast? Melissa asked, following my gaze. Yes and no, I admitted. I knew there was a market gap we could fill. I knew we had the talent and approach to succeed. I turned to her with a small smile. But I didn't anticipate how spectacularly Meridian would collapse without us. The industry gossip mills had been working overtime, documenting Meridian's decline. Gerald had been replaced as CEO 6 months ago by a turnaround specialist brought in by the board. The company had lost nearly 60% of its client base and had downsized to a skeleton crew operating from a much smaller office space. The grand plans for expansion that had once been trumpeted at quarterly meetings had given way to desperate attempts simply to survive. From what I hear, the acquisition talks with Tricor Consulting have stalled, Melissa said, referring to the larger firm that had been considering absorbing what remained of Meridian. Apparently, they completed their due diligence and found insufficient assets to justify the purchase price. Translation: the only valuable assets Meridian had were its people and client relationships, I observed, most of which are now here. Poetic justice, Melissa grinned. But speaking of justice, we should probably head to the conference room. The quarterly strategy meeting starts in 5 minutes, and I think you'll want to hear the revenue projections. The main conference room, which we had named Horizon, in keeping with our forward-looking ethos, was already filling with department heads and key team leaders as we arrived. I took my place at the head of the table, nodding greetings to each person as they settled in. Monica was to my right, tablet in hand, already pulling up the client services report. Jason sat beside her, his data analytics presentation queued and ready. Diana had arranged herself at the far end where she could control the main display screen for her creative team's portfolio presentation. And Ryan, positioned halfway down the table, neither prominently placed nor obviously sidelined, had his project management metrics prepared for review. Looking at him now, it was difficult to reconcile this version of Ryan Hamilton with the manipulative saboteur who had destroyed my career prospects at Meridian. His demeanor had undergone a remarkable transformation over the past 9 months. The brash overconfidence had given way to measured competence. The political maneuvering had been replaced by genuine collaboration. Whether this change stemmed from humility, necessity, or true personal growth remained somewhat ambiguous, but the results were undeniable. Let's begin, I said, bringing the room to attention. Monica, client services overview, please. Monica launched into a comprehensive analysis of our client portfolio, highlighting retention rates that exceeded industry standards by 28%. Our client satisfaction scores are consistently in the 95th percentile, she noted with justified pride. Exit interviews with the 3 clients who did not renew revealed that all departures were due to internal budget constraints rather than dissatisfaction with our services. Excellent, I acknowledged. What about new client acquisition? We've onboarded 11 new clients this quarter, she continued, with an average project value 17% higher than our established accounts. She glanced at me with a meaningful look. Including Westridge Properties, who have expanded their initial engagement to include full strategic planning services. A subtle ripple of appreciation moved through the room. Everyone present knew the significance of the Westridge account. They had been one of Meridian's anchor clients before becoming one of the first to follow me to Mitchell Strategic Consulting. And Ryan's team has been instrumental in managing that expansion, Monica added with a generous nod toward him. The client specifically mentioned his attention to detail and responsiveness in their feedback. Ryan's expression registered genuine surprise at this public acknowledgement from the woman who was now his superior, the same woman who had once helped him undermine me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew our shared history. "Thank you," he said simply, "though it's been a true team effort." The rest of the presentations proceeded with similar evidence of our company's robust health. Jason's data analytics revealed patterns of growth that projected continued expansion for at least 8 quarters. Diana's creative portfolio showcased innovative approaches that had garnered industry recognition. The financial reports confirmed what we all sensed. Mitchell's Strategic Consulting had not just survived its first year, it had thrived beyond even my optimistic projections. As the meeting concluded and the team began to disperse, I asked Ryan to remain behind. He nodded, his expression carefully neutral as he gathered his materials while others filed out. Melissa shot me a questioning glance, but I gave a small, reassuring nod. This conversation needed to happen one-on-one. When the door closed behind the last departing team member, Ryan looked up expectantly. "Something wrong with my report?" "No," I replied, taking a seat across from him rather than maintaining my position at the head of the table. "Your reports were thorough, and your team's performance metrics are strong." He waited, clearly sensing there was more to this conversation than performance feedback. "It's been 9 months since you joined Mitchell Strategic Consulting," I continued. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about your experience here and about our shared past." Something flickered in his eyes. Apprehension, perhaps, or resignation. "I've been expecting this conversation," he admitted. "Honestly, I'm surprised it took this long." "What exactly were you expecting?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perception. Ryan shifted in his chair. "I don't know. Confrontation? Public humiliation? Firing now that you've proven your point?" He gave a humorless laugh. "Some days I arrive at the office half expecting to find my things in a box." The candor was surprising and revealing. Despite 9 months of fair treatment, part of him still anticipated retribution rather than legitimate professional opportunity. It spoke volumes about how he would have handled the situation had our positions been reversed. "That's not how I operate," I said simply. "If I had wanted revenge in that sense, I wouldn't have hired you in the first place." "Then why did you?" The question came quietly but directly. "You never really explained." "Not fully." I considered my response carefully. This moment seemed to demand something beyond the professional justifications I had offered during our initial meeting. "Because true success isn't just about what you build," I said finally. "It's about how you build it. Taking the ethical high ground doesn't just feel better, it produces better results." I leaned forward slightly. "Look around you, Ryan. Every person who participated in undermining me at Meridian is now thriving here, contributing to something successful, doing their best work in roles suited to their actual talents." I allowed a small, satisfied smile. "Meanwhile, the company that rewarded political maneuvering over performance is barely surviving." "That's your revenge," he said slowly, realization dawning in his expression. "Not humiliation or termination. This dash," he gestured around us, "creating a better company and having us all acknowledge it by choosing to work here." "In part," I acknowledged, "though revenge implies something more vindictive than what this has become." I gestured toward the window overlooking our thriving workspace. "This is validation, proof that my approach to business was always the right one, regardless of what happened at Meridian." Ryan was silent for a long moment, absorbing this perspective. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an unfamiliar note of genuine humility. "I've thought about apologizing properly 100 times," he said, "but it always felt inadequate. How do you apologize for deliberately derailing someone's career?" "You don't apologize," I replied matter-of-factly. "You demonstrate change, which somewhat to my surprise, you've been doing consistently since you joined us." His eyebrows rose slightly. "To your surprise, I hired you primarily for your client relationship skills," I explained. "I anticipated adequate performance in a limited role." I gave him a direct look. I didn't necessarily expect genuine adaptation to our collaborative culture or the level of professional growth you've shown. The assessment seemed to catch him off guard. He had clearly anticipated criticism rather than qualified praise. Your performance reviews reflect this. I continued, sliding a folder across the table that I had prepared before the meeting. Monica has recommended you for the new senior client relationship manager position we're creating as part of our restructuring. Ryan stared at the folder without opening it. Why are you telling me this privately? Why not in the team meeting or through normal channels? It was a perceptive question that cut to the heart of my lingering ambivalence about our professional relationship. Because I wanted to be certain my decision about your advancement was based on merit rather than any residual feelings about our history, I admitted. And because I wanted you to understand something important about leadership, I stood and moved to the window, looking out at the team we had built, the company I had created from the ruins of betrayal. Real leadership isn't about undermining competitors or claiming credit for others' work. I said, it's about creating conditions where everyone can contribute their best, including people who once worked against you. I turned back to face him. Even people who might have sabotaged your presentation slides. Ryan had the grace to look uncomfortable at the specific reference to his past actions. I've wondered if Diana told you about that. She did, I confirmed, just as she told me about your various conversations with team members planting doubts about my management style and suggesting I had criticized their work. His gaze dropped to the table. It wasn't my finest moment. No, it wasn't. I agreed without heat. The question is whether you've learned from it. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken recognitions. When Ryan finally looked up, his expression was more genuine than I had ever seen it, stripped of the calculated charm and strategic positioning that had been his hallmarks at Meridian. I'm not the same person who did those things, he said quietly. Working here, seeing how a truly merit-based organization operates, it changes your perspective. He gestured toward the folder I had given him. This promotion, I want to earn it legitimately. No shortcuts, no politics. If Monica doesn't think I'm ready, or if you have reservations based on my performance rather than our history, I'll accept that assessment. I studied him thoughtfully. Could people truly change so fundamentally? Or was this simply another performance, adapted to a different environment? The evidence of the past 9 months suggested the former, but experience had taught me caution. The promotion is yours if you want it, I said finally. Not because of our history or in spite of it, but because your performance metrics and client feedback support it. The relief that washed over his features seemed genuine. Thank you, he said simply. I won't disappoint you. As he gathered his materials to leave, I added one final comment. The restructuring announcement will be made tomorrow morning. I'd appreciate your discretion until then. He nodded his understanding and departed, leaving me alone in the conference room with thoughts that drifted inevitably to how far we had all come from the betrayal that had set these events in motion. Later that afternoon, Melissa found me in my office reviewing the final details of our organizational restructuring announcement. So, she asked without preamble, how did it go with Ryan? You two were in there a while. Surprisingly well, I admitted. I think he's genuinely evolved since his Meridian days. Melissa looked skeptical. People don't change their fundamental nature, Alex. They just adapt to different reward systems. She perched on the edge of my desk. At Meridian, backstabbing was rewarded. Here, collaboration is rewarded. He's just responding to incentives. Her assessment wasn't without merit, but it also felt incomplete. Maybe, I conceded. But responding to better incentives consistently over time, isn't that ultimately indistinguishable from actual change? Philosophically speaking, perhaps, she said with a small smile. But I'd still watch my back if I were you. Old habits can resurface under pressure. I nodded, acknowledging her concern, while privately reflecting that my system was designed precisely to ensure that any reversion to unethical behavior would be quickly exposed and naturally disadvantaged. Unlike Meridian, Mitchell Strategic Consulting had built-in transparency that made political maneuvering difficult to conceal. Speaking of pressure, Melissa continued, shifting topics. Gerald's assistant called today. He's requesting a meeting with you again. I raised an eyebrow in surprise. Gerald personally? Not the new CEO? Apparently he's still on the board despite being replaced as CEO. The assistant was vague about the purpose but mentioned mutual business interests and potential synergies. Corporate speak for desperation, if you ask me. I leaned back in my chair considering this development. Gerald had reached out several times in the early months of Mitchell Strategic Consulting's existence, first with veiled threats, then with reluctant offers of potential acquisition. Each approach had grown progressively more favorable to my interests as Meridian's position weakened. I had declined all previous overtures, focused on building my company rather than engaging with the remnants of my past. What do you think he wants this time? I asked. Melissa shrugged. Industry rumor says the Tricor acquisition fell through completely. My guess? They're running out of options and capital, probably looking for a white knight. The implication was clear. Meridian, the company that had once seemed so powerful, so immovable, the company that had been the site of my professional humiliation, was now potentially seeking salvation from me. The irony was almost too perfect. Schedule the meeting, I decided, but at our offices, not on neutral ground. If Gerald wants to discuss mutual business interests, he can do it on our territory. Melissa grinned. Enjoying the power dynamic reversal? Just establishing appropriate business protocols? I replied with a small smile of my own. After all, we're the stable, successful company now. They're the ones in need of assistance. The following morning brought our restructuring announcement. The team gathered in the main communal space, coffee cups in hand, expressions curious as I stood before them with Monica and Melissa flanking me. As you all know, I began. Mitchell Strategic Consulting has experienced extraordinary growth in our first year. What began as a vision has become a thriving reality, thanks to the exceptional contributions of everyone in this room. I paused, looking around at the faces before me. Some who had betrayed me, some who had supported me, all who had ultimately chosen to be part of what I was building. To sustain this growth and prepare for our next phase of expansion, we're implementing a strategic restructuring that creates new leadership opportunities and clarifies our organizational design. The announcement proceeded with the expected promotions. Monica to Executive Vice President of Client Services, Melissa to Chief Operations Officer, Jason to Director of Data Analytics. Diana's elevation to Creative Director had occurred months earlier, her talent too significant to delay recognition. When I announced Ryan's promotion to Senior Client Relationship Manager, I watched the reactions carefully. There were nods of acknowledgement, a few congratulatory pats on the back, but notably absent were the whispers of resentment or skepticism that might have greeted such news at Meridian. Here, the promotion was accepted as the natural result of demonstrated performance rather than political maneuvering. The most significant announcement, however, came last. Finally, I'm pleased to announce that Mitchell Strategic Consulting will be opening a West Coast office within the next quarter. I revealed, triggering a wave of excited murmurs. This expansion represents not just geographical growth, but a testament to the strength of our business model and the excellence of our team. Questions flowed naturally about staffing for the new office, about which clients would be served from that location, about opportunities for internal transfers. I answered what I could and promised more details in departmental meetings scheduled throughout the week. As the gathering dispersed, the energy in the office was palpable, the collective excitement of being part of something growing, something successful. I returned to my office to find an email notification confirming Gerald's acceptance of our meeting location. He would be arriving the following afternoon. Nervous? Melissa asked, appearing in my doorway as I closed the email. About meeting Gerald? I shook my head. No. There's nothing he can say or do that has any power over me anymore. And it was true. The Gerald who had once held my career trajectory in his hands, who had delivered the crushing news of my passed-over promotion in that leather chair across from his desk, that Gerald now existed only in memory. The man arriving tomorrow would be diminished, seeking something from me rather than determining what I deserved. Well, I've arranged for the meeting to be in the Horizon conference room, Melissa informed me with a hint of mischief. I thought the view of our thriving operation might provide helpful context for your discussions. I laughed at her transparent strategy. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Too late, she quipped. You already did when you made me COO without a corresponding parking spot upgrade. I'll have that remedied immediately, I promised with mock seriousness. Can't have executive dissatisfaction in the ranks. Our easy banter was interrupted by a notification that the first of my post-announcement departmental meetings was about to begin. The rest of the day passed in a blur of strategic discussions, expansion planning, and the kind of productive energy that comes from shared purpose and clear direction. It wasn't until late that evening, alone in my apartment overlooking the city lights, that I allowed myself to fully contemplate the significance of tomorrow's meeting with Gerald. This wasn't just another business discussion. It represented a full-circle moment in a journey that had begun with betrayal and humiliation, but had transformed into something far more meaningful than simple revenge. The next day, I dressed with particular care, selecting a suit that projected confidence without ostentation. The subtle power dressing wasn't for Gerald's benefit, but rather a reminder to myself of how completely circumstances had changed. I had once dressed carefully for meetings with him out of anxiety about being judged. Now I did so from a position of strength and self-assurance. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, reviewing key financial data and market positioning information that might be relevant to whatever Gerald was planning to propose. Melissa had arranged for light refreshments in the conference room, another subtle power play that placed Gerald in the position of guest rather than equal. "He's here," Melissa announced from my doorway precisely at the scheduled time. "Security just called up. Diana's escorting him from the lobby." I nodded, gathering my tablet and standing. "Conference room in 5 minutes." The brief delay was strategic, not long enough to be overtly discourteous, but sufficient to establish that I would not be rushing to accommodate Gerald's schedule as I once might have. When I entered the Horizon conference room, Gerald was standing at the window wall, looking out over our main workspace with an expression I couldn't immediately decipher. He turned at the sound of the door, and I was struck by how much he had aged in the past year. The confident executive I remembered had given way to someone noticeably more careworn, with deeper lines around his eyes and a slightly diminished posture. "Alex," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Gerald," I replied, accepting the handshake with professional courtesy. "Welcome to Mitchell Strategic Consulting." We settled at the conference table, the glass walls providing a panoramic view of our thriving operation, a visual reminder of what I had built from the ashes of Meridian's betrayal. "Impressive space," Gerald commented, gesturing toward the view. "You've clearly done well for yourself." "We've built something special," I agreed, deliberately using the plural to emphasize the collaborative nature of our success. "I'm proud of what our team has accomplished in a relatively short time." Gerald nodded, his gaze drifting back to the busy workspace beyond the glass. I recognized quite a few familiar faces out there. There was no accusation in his tone, just a weary acknowledgement of reality. I chose not to respond directly to the observation, instead steering the conversation toward its purpose. "Your assistant mentioned mutual business interests," I prompted. "I'm curious what brings you here today, especially given your transition from CEO to board member at Meridian." Gerald's attention returned to me, his expression carefully composed. "Direct as always," he noted with a hint of his former authoritative manner. "Very well. I'll reciprocate that directness." He leaned forward slightly. "Meridian Solutions is at a critical juncture. The Tricor acquisition has fallen through, as you've likely heard. Our client base has continued to erode, and our ability to attract and retain top talent has been," he paused, searching for the right word, "compromised. I'm aware of Meridian's challenges," I acknowledged neutrally, "though I'm not sure how they constitute mutual business interests." Gerald drew a deep breath. "The board has authorized me to explore strategic alternatives that might preserve Meridian's remaining value. One such alternative would be a merger with a more stable entity in our sector." The implication hung in the air between us, so obvious it hardly needed articulation. Yet Gerald seemed to feel it necessary to spell it out. "We're proposing a merger between Meridian Solutions and Mitchell Strategic Consulting," he stated. "A combination that would consolidate market position, eliminate competitive pressures, and create operational synergies." I kept my expression carefully neutral, despite the sweet irony of the moment. The company that had denied me leadership was now seeking to be led by me. "An interesting proposal," I said, measured. "Though I'm curious about the structure you envision for such a merger." Gerald shifted slightly in his chair, a tell I remembered from my days reporting to him. He was entering uncomfortable territory. "Given the respective market positions of our companies, we recognize that this would effectively be an acquisition of Meridian by Mitchell," he admitted. "We're prepared to accept that reality in the terms." I allowed a moment of silence to emphasize the significance of what he was saying. "To be clear," I said finally, "you're proposing that I acquire the company that determined I wasn't qualified for senior leadership just over a year ago?" Gerald had the grace to look discomfited. "Circumstances change," he offered weakly. "Markets evolve. What seemed appropriate then may appear misjudged in retrospect." "Indeed," I agreed, permitting myself a small smile. "Circumstances do change." I stood and moved to the window wall, looking out at my thriving company. At Monica leading a client call, at Jason collaborating with his analytics team, at Diana reviewing design concepts with her creatives, at Ryan now contributing positively in a system designed to reward merit rather than manipulation. "Why should this merger interest me, Gerald?" I asked, turning back to face him. "Mitchell Strategic Consulting is growing rapidly on its own. We're profitable, expanding to the West Coast, and gaining market share naturally as clients seek better service models. Gerald nodded grimly, as though he had anticipated this question. Three reasons, he said. First, immediate geographic expansion. Meridian still maintains offices in Chicago and Atlanta that could accelerate your growth plans. Second, elimination of a competitor, albeit a weakened one. And third, he hesitated before continuing, completion. Completion? I repeated, curious about his choice of word. Yes, he confirmed. Acquiring Meridian would represent a definitive conclusion to the unfortunate circumstances of your departure. A final validation, if you will. It was surprisingly insightful and transparent coming from Gerald. He was essentially offering me the opportunity to purchase vindication, to acquire the company that had rejected me and fold it into the superior organization I had built. What you're suggesting, I said slowly, retaking my seat across from him, is that I should acquire Meridian for the emotional satisfaction of absorbing the company that undervalued me? Gerald spread his hands in a gesture of concession. I'm merely noting that beyond the business rationale, there might be a certain poetic symmetry to such an arrangement. I studied him thoughtfully, struck by how completely our positions had reversed. Here was Gerald, once the arbiter of my professional fate, now essentially begging me to rescue the remnants of the company he had helped mismanage. I appreciate your candor, I said finally, and I'll consider the proposal seriously from a business perspective. But I should be equally candid with you. I leaned forward, holding his gaze steadily. Mitchell's strategic consulting wasn't built on emotional decisions. Our success stems from strategic vision, merit-based leadership, and genuine value creation for clients. Any acquisition we consider must align with those principles, not with settling old scores or achieving symbolic victories. Gerald nodded, accepting the implicit rebuke with surprising grace. A reasonable position, he acknowledged. I wouldn't expect less from you. I'll need comprehensive data on Meridian's current financial position, client contracts, and personnel. I continued, transitioning smoothly into due diligence mode. My team will evaluate the business case objectively and determine whether there's potential mutual benefit. Of course, Gerald agreed readily. I've brought preliminary materials. He reached for his briefcase, producing a flash drive and several bound reports. These include the information that was prepared for the Tri-Core discussions. We can provide any additional data your team requires. I accepted the materials with a nod. I'll have our CFO and legal team review these as a starting point. Assuming there's potential merit to the proposal, we'll proceed with more detailed examination. Gerald seemed to relax slightly, perhaps relieved that I hadn't dismissed the idea outright. That's all we ask, fair consideration. Fair consideration is something I value highly. I replied, the subtle reference to my own treatment at Meridian not lost on either of us. As our meeting concluded and I escorted Gerald through our workspace toward the elevators, I was acutely aware of the curious glances from my team members. The presence of Meridian's former CEO, now diminished board member, in our offices would inevitably trigger speculation. Quite a different environment from Meridian, Gerald observed as we walked, nodding toward the open collaborative spaces and glass-walled meeting rooms that characterized our office design. By design, I confirmed, transparency and collaboration are core values here, reflected in both our physical space and our organizational culture. Gerald paused briefly as we passed the area where Ryan was engaged in discussion with two other team members. Recognition flickered across his features. Interesting staffing choices, he commented neutrally. Merit-based, I replied simply. Everyone here has earned their position through demonstrable performance and alignment with our values. At the elevator bank, Gerald extended his hand once more. Thank you for your time, Alex. Whatever you decide about the proposal, I must acknowledge the impressive organization you've built here. A hint of genuine regret crept into his expression. Meridian's loss has clearly been your gain, and that of everyone who's joined you. As the elevator doors closed behind him, I stood momentarily in the reception area, processing the surreal nature of this encounter. If someone had told me a year ago that Gerald would be coming to me with acquisition proposals, practically hat in hand, I would have dismissed it as a revenge fantasy too perfect to be plausible. Yet here we were. Melissa appeared at my side, curiosity evident in her expression. Well, what did the fallen mighty want? Merger proposal, I replied succinctly. Effectively an acquisition of what remains of Meridian. Her eyebrows shot up. Seriously? The company that wouldn't promote you now wants you to buy them out? She shook her head in amazement. You can't make this stuff up. Life does occasionally deliver perfect narrative arcs, I acknowledged with a small smile. But business decisions should be based on strategy, not storytelling. So you're actually considering it? She asked, falling into step beside me as we walked back toward the main office area. I'm considering having our team evaluate whether there's any business merit to the proposal, I clarified. A distinction that matters. Melissa nodded thoughtfully. Fair enough. Though I have to say, the idea of putting the Meridian name under Mitchell on the letterhead has a certain appealing symmetry to it. That would be thinking small, I replied. If we were to proceed, there would be no Meridian name at all. Just Mitchell Strategic Consulting, expanded to include salvageable assets from a former competitor. The symbolism of completely absorbing and erasing the Meridian identity wasn't lost on Melissa, whose grin widened appreciatively. Now that's how revenge is properly served. It's not about revenge, I corrected automatically, though not entirely convincingly. It's about business strategy. Right, she agreed with exaggerated seriousness. Purely business. Not at all about acquiring the company that undervalued you and systematically dismantling its identity while absorbing any remaining value into the superior organization you created from scratch after they pushed you out. Put that way, it did sound remarkably like the ultimate revenge scenario, but there was truth in my protest. This wasn't just about settling scores anymore. Mitchell's Strategic Consulting had evolved into something more meaningful than an instrument of retribution. Have finance and legal review the materials Gerald provided? I instructed, returning to COO mode. Preliminary assessment only at this stage. If there's potential value, we'll proceed with formal due diligence. Will do, Melissa confirmed. And the executive team? Do we brief them on this possibility? I considered the question carefully. Transparency was a core value of our organization, but premature discussion of a potential Meridian acquisition could create unnecessary anxiety, particularly among former Meridian employees. Limited disclosure for now, I decided. Brief Monica, Jason, and Diana individually. Emphasize that we're only in the preliminary assessment stage. And Ryan? Melissa asked pointedly. It was a fair question. Ryan's position was unique. He had been the primary beneficiary of my sabotage at Meridian, but had since demonstrated genuine growth at Mitchell. How would he react to the possibility of Mitchell absorbing Meridian? I'll speak with Ryan myself, I determined. His perspective may be valuable, given his inside knowledge of Meridian's operations. Melissa nodded her agreement, and we parted ways to address our respective responsibilities. I returned to my office to find several urgent matters requiring attention. Client proposals, staffing decisions for the West Coast expansion, strategic partnership opportunities. The normal business of running a successful consultancy temporarily pushed thoughts of the Meridian proposal to the background. It wasn't until late afternoon that I found time to request a meeting with Ryan. He arrived promptly, his manner professional but curious. Is this about the West Coast staffing? He asked as he took a seat across from my desk. I've been working on recommendations for client relationship managers who might be suitable for relocation. Actually, it's about something else entirely, I replied. What I'm about to share is confidential at this stage, understood? He nodded, his expression shifting to one of attentive seriousness. Of course. Gerald met with me this morning. I began, watching him carefully for his reaction. Meridian is proposing a merger. Effectively, our acquisition of what remains of their operation. Ryan's eyebrows rose slightly, but he maintained his composure. That's unexpected, he said after a moment. Though perhaps it shouldn't be, given how things have evolved for both companies. I'm having our financial and legal teams conduct a preliminary assessment, I continued. But I wanted your perspective as someone with recent inside knowledge of Meridian's operations. Is there potential value there worth pursuing? Ryan considered the question thoughtfully, his response measured and analytical rather than emotional. Another sign of his professional growth since joining Mitchell. Their client base has deteriorated significantly, he observed, but they still maintain relationships with a few key accounts that could be valuable if properly serviced. Their Chicago and Atlanta offices are small, but located in prime business districts with favorable lease terms. He frowned slightly. The remaining staff is a mixed bag. Some excellent professionals who stayed out of loyalty or risk aversion, some mediocre performers who couldn't find better options elsewhere. His assessment was frank and seemingly objective, showing no signs of either vindictive pleasure at Meridian's decline or sentimental attachment to his former employer. If you're asking whether there's salvageable value, he concluded, the answer is yes, but significantly less than what existed a year ago. The question is whether acquiring that value directly serves our strategic objectives better than simply continuing to outcompete them in the marketplace. It was a sophisticated business analysis that impressed me. Further evidence that when channeled properly, Ryan's strategic thinking could be genuinely valuable. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "That's helpful perspective." Ryan hesitated, then added, "May I offer a personal observation as well?" I nodded, curious about what he felt compelled to add. Acquiring Meridian would be seen throughout the industry as the final chapter in a remarkable turnaround story, he said carefully. The narrative would be powerful, the passed-over employee returning to absorb the company that undervalued them. "You think I should make a business decision based on narrative impact?" I asked, slightly surprised by this line of reasoning. "Not exclusively," he clarified, "but in consulting, perception matters. Client confidence, talent attraction, industry positioning, all are influenced by the stories people tell about a company." He met my gaze directly. This particular story would position Mitchell Strategic Consulting as not just successful, but definitively triumphant. It was an unexpectedly nuanced point, and one that revealed Ryan's growing sophistication about factors beyond immediate financial metrics. The reputational impact of acquiring Meridian would indeed extend beyond the balance sheet calculations. "I'll take that into consideration," I acknowledge. "Though any decision will ultimately be based on comprehensive analysis of business value." Ryan nodded his understanding as he stood to leave. At the door, he paused and turned back. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "the symmetry would be appropriate." After he departed, I sat contemplating this conversation and its implications. Ryan's response had been more mature and professionally sound than I might have anticipated a year ago. Further evidence that people could indeed evolve when placed in environments that rewarded the right behaviors. The following weeks were consumed with parallel tracks of strategic activity, continuing our planned West Coast expansion while simultaneously conducting due diligence on the potential Meridian acquisition. Our financial team combed through Meridian's books, our legal counsel reviewed their contracts and liabilities, and our operations specialists assessed their remaining infrastructure and processes. The picture that emerged was of a company in deeper distress than Gerald had acknowledged. Cash reserves were critically low. Several major clients were on the verge of non-renewal. The Chicago office was significantly underutilized, with maintenance costs exceeding its revenue generation. If we're being blunt, our CFO summarized during a confidential executive review, Meridian has perhaps 6 months of operational runway remaining before more drastic measures would be required, likely involving significant layoffs or possible bankruptcy restructuring. The assessment was sobering but not entirely surprising. Meridian's decline had been steep and accelerating, exactly what happens when a company loses its best talent and fails to adapt to changing market conditions. "So they're essentially asking us to rescue a sinking ship," Melissa observed, reviewing the financial projections. "The question is whether there's enough salvageable value to justify taking on the risk and integration costs." It was the fundamental question at the heart of our analysis, and one that required careful consideration beyond mere financial calculations. Absorbing Meridian would divert resources and attention from our planned organic growth. It would introduce cultural integration challenges. It would potentially bring in staff members who hadn't been vetted through our normal rigorous hiring processes. Yet there were undeniable strategic advantages as well. Immediate geographic expansion, elimination of a competitor, however weakened, access to certain client relationships that might otherwise take years to develop. And as Ryan had noted, the powerful narrative of Mitchell acquiring the company that had once undervalued its founder. After 3 weeks of intensive analysis, I convened a special meeting of our executive team to make a final determination. Each department head presented their assessment of the potential acquisition from their functional perspective: finance, operations, client services, creative, data analytics. The discussion was thorough, balanced, and refreshingly free of political positioning or hidden agendas. Exactly the kind of merit-based decision process I had designed our company to foster. By meeting's end, a consensus had emerged. We would pursue the acquisition, but with significant conditions and a substantially lower valuation than Gerald had initially proposed. I called Gerald personally to request a follow-up meeting. His eagerness to accommodate my schedule was telling. Another reminder of how completely our respective positions had reversed in just over a year. 2 days later, Gerald returned to the Horizon conference room, this time accompanied by Meridian's legal counsel and the turnaround specialist who had replaced him as CEO. a sharp-featured woman named Elaine Winters, whose reputation for ruthless cost-cutting preceded her. "Thank you for meeting with us," I began once introductions were complete. "We've conducted a thorough analysis of the proposed merger and are prepared to present our response." I nodded to our CFO, who distributed copies of our counterproposal to the Meridian representatives. As they reviewed the documents, I observed their reactions closely. Gerald's expression remained carefully neutral, though a slight tightening around his eyes suggested he had anticipated our valuation adjustment. Elaine Winters flipped through the pages with clinical detachment, her focus on the financial terms rather than any emotional subtext. The legal counsel frowned slightly at several of our conditions. "This valuation is significantly below our proposal," Gerald noted, breaking the silence. "It reflects the reality of Meridian's current position," I replied evenly. "Our due diligence revealed challenges more severe than your material suggested, particularly regarding cash flow projections and client retention probabilities." Elaine Winters looked up sharply. "Your valuation essentially assigns no premium to Meridian's brand equity or institutional knowledge." "That's correct," our CFO confirmed. "Our analysis indicates that the Meridian brand has experienced substantial erosion in market value. As for institutional knowledge, much of that has already transferred to Mitchell Strategic Consulting through personnel transitions." The blunt assessment hung in the air between us. What remained unspoken but understood by everyone in the room was the fundamental truth. Meridian's most valuable assets had been walking out the door for months, many of them directly to Mitchell. "We should also discuss the structural terms," I continued, directing attention to the relevant section of our proposal. Mitchell Strategic Consulting would acquire Meridian Solutions in its entirety. The Meridian name and brand would be retired, with all operations, clients, and remaining personnel integrated under the Mitchell Strategic Consulting identity. Gerald's expression tightened further at this explicit confirmation of what he had likely anticipated: the complete absorption and erasure of the Meridian identity. "That's non-negotiable?" he asked, his tone carefully controlled. "It is," I confirmed without elaboration. Elaine Winters studied me with clinical interest. "This isn't just about business, is it, Mr. Mitchell?" she asked directly. "There's history here I'm not fully privy to." I met her gaze steadily. "History provides context, Miss Winters, but our proposal is based on current business realities. Maintaining dual brands would create unnecessary complexity and dilute the market positioning we've established." She nodded slightly, seemingly satisfied with the response, even if she didn't entirely believe its complete neutrality. "There are additional conditions regarding personnel retention and integration that warrant discussion," our HR director noted, drawing attention to another section of the proposal. The meeting continued for nearly 2 hours, with detailed examination of our terms and conditions. Throughout the discussion, I maintained professional composure, neither gloating over Meridian's diminished position nor giving ground on our core requirements. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making a sound business decision that happened to carry significant symbolic weight. As the meeting concluded, Gerald requested a moment to speak with me privately. Elaine Winters appeared reluctant to leave us alone, but eventually departed with the other team members, leaving Gerald and me once again facing each other across the conference table. "You've built something remarkable here, Alex," he said once we were alone, gesturing toward the vibrant workspace visible through the glass walls. "Something I should have recognized you were capable of much earlier." The acknowledgement was surprising in its directness. "Thank you," I replied simply. Gerald sighed, suddenly looking every bit his age and then some. "I made a mistake with the senior project manager decision," he admitted. "I allowed office politics to influence a choice that should have been based on merit and capability." It was the explicit acknowledgement I had never expected to hear. Validation of what I had known all along about the circumstances of my passed-over promotion. "Yes," I agreed calmly. "You did. And now you're in position to acquire the company that undervalued you, to absorb it completely into the superior organization you've created." He gave a humorless laugh. "There's a certain poetic justice to it." "Business isn't poetry, Gerald," I replied. "It's about creating value through strategic decisions and building environments where talent can flourish." Meridian failed at both. Mitchell Strategic Consulting succeeds at both. The outcome was predictable based on those fundamentals, regardless of our personal history. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You always did see things more clearly than most," he acknowledged. "Including me, apparently." Gerald stood, preparing to depart. "For what it's worth, I believe your proposal is fair given the circumstances," he said. "I'll recommend to the board that we accept your terms." As I watched him walk away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly, the natural response to this complete reversal of fortune and explicit validation of my worth. But there was also something unexpected, a touch of compassion for a man whose poor judgment had ultimately cost him his company and professional standing. Revenge, it seemed, provided diminishing returns once success had been thoroughly established. The acquisition of Meridian would be the final chapter in this particular narrative, but it felt less like triumphant retribution and more like the natural conclusion to a business case study in meritocracy versus politics. 3 weeks later, contracts were signed. Mitchell Strategic Consulting officially acquired what remained of Meridian Solutions, its clients, its regional offices, its intellectual property, and its remaining staff. The press release emphasized strategic growth and expanded capabilities, rather than the personal backstory that industry insiders knew all too well. The integration process began immediately, with transition teams assigned to each functional area. Monica oversaw client relationship transfers, ensuring continuity of service while introducing Mitchell's enhanced delivery models. Melissa managed operational integration, determining which Meridian systems to maintain and which to replace. Jason evaluated data analytics capabilities and knowledge management practices. Diana developed rebranding materials to smooth the transition for clients in the marketplace. I personally oversaw the staff integration process, working closely with our HR team to evaluate remaining Meridian personnel. Each employee received fair consideration based on skills, performance history, and alignment with Mitchell's collaborative culture. Some were offered positions immediately. Others were provided transition assistance and generous severance packages. The Chicago office was maintained but downsized to a more sustainable footprint. The Atlanta location was transformed into our Southeastern regional headquarters, positioning us for expansion into additional markets. The Meridian headquarters, where I had once been passed over for promotion, was closed entirely, its functions consolidated into Mitchell's existing operations. Throughout this process, I maintained regular communication with all staff, both Mitchell veterans and Meridian newcomers, emphasizing our commitment to merit-based advancement and collaborative problem-solving. The message was consistent and clear. Past affiliations mattered less than present contributions and future potential. 6 months after the acquisition, we held a company-wide gathering to mark the successful completion of the integration process. The event was hosted at a downtown venue, with team members from all locations brought together to celebrate our unified organization. Standing at the podium, looking out at the assembled professionals, some who had once undermined me, some who had supported me, some who had joined our journey at various points along the way, I felt a profound sense of closure. A company is more than its name, its logo, or its office locations. I began. It's more than its client roster or balance sheet. A company at its core is its people and the culture they create together. I gestured toward the room, where Mitchell veterans and former Meridian staff were now mingling as colleagues rather than competitors. What we've built together isn't just a successful business, though our financial results certainly qualify as extraordinary by any standard. What we've built is a community where merit is recognized, where collaboration outperforms competition, and where ethical leadership creates sustainable value. My gaze found Ryan in the audience, now fully integrated into the Mitchell leadership team and thriving in an environment that rewarded his genuine talents rather than his political maneuvering. Some of you have been part of this journey from the beginning. Others joined along the way. Some came to us through the recent integration, but what matters isn't where you started. It's where we're going together. I raised my glass in a toast. To Mitchell Strategic Consulting, not just a company, but a testament to what becomes possible when we value the right things and create conditions where everyone can contribute their best. The room responded with enthusiasm, glasses raised in celebration of what we had collectively achieved. As I stepped away from the podium, Monica approached, champagne glass in hand. Quite a journey from that bathroom conversation after you were passed over for promotion, she observed with a knowing smile. Did you ever imagine it would lead here? I considered her question thoughtfully. Not specifically, I admitted. I knew I would create something meaningful from that setback, but I couldn't have predicted exactly how complete the transformation would be. From betrayed employee to CEO of the company that acquired your betrayers, she summarized succinctly. It's the kind of story people will study in business school someday. Perhaps she was right. The narrative arc was certainly compelling. From devastating professional betrayal to methodical planning, from strategic execution to ultimate triumph. But what mattered more than the story was the reality it represented. The validation of merit over manipulation, of ethical leadership over expedient politics. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around me, I found a quiet moment to step onto the venue's balcony for some fresh air and reflection. The city lights stretched before me, a tapestry of possibilities and potential. Mitchell's strategic consulting now stood poised for national expansion, with a foundation strong enough to support ambitious growth. "Mind some company?" a familiar voice asked. Ryan stood at the balcony doorway, his expression thoughtful rather than celebratory. "Not at all," I replied, gesturing to the space beside me. He joined me at the railing, both of us looking out at the cityscape rather than directly at each other. "I've been thinking about how different things might have been," he said after a moment of comfortable silence. "If Gerald had made a different decision that day, if you had gotten the promotion you deserved," it was a counterfactual that had occasionally crossed my mind as well. The alternative timeline where the betrayal had never occurred, where my career had progressed conventionally within Meridian. Meridian would probably still exist as an independent entity, I acknowledged. I would have worked to improve its processes and culture from within, and I would likely still be undermining colleagues to advance my own position, Ryan added with surprising candor, because that behavior was rewarded in that environment. He turned slightly to face me. "I'm not proud of who I was at Meridian or what I did to you," he said quietly, "but I'm grateful for the opportunity to become someone different here." The sincerity in his expression suggested genuine evolution rather than strategic performance. Perhaps the most meaningful vindication of the culture I had created. "That's the point of all this," I replied, gesturing toward the celebration inside and the thriving company it represented. "Not revenge or vindication ultimately, but creating an environment where everyone, including those who once worked against me, can become their best professional selves." Ryan nodded slowly, absorbing the philosophy that had transformed defeat into something far more meaningful than mere retribution. "To unintended consequences," he said, raising his glass in a small toast, "and to leaders who recognize that success is the best revenge." I touched my glass to his, acknowledging the truth in his observation. "To building something worth building," I amended slightly, regardless of what motivated its beginning. As we stood there in companionable silence, overlooking the city where our professional drama had unfolded, I felt a sense of completion that transcended the satisfaction of revenge. My coworkers had indeed sabotaged my promotion, and I had indeed launched my own business and hired them all. But the story had evolved into something more meaningful than its vindictive origins, a testament to what becomes possible when betrayal is transformed into creation rather than destruction. The revenge had been sweet, certainly, but the success built upon it, the thriving company, the collaborative culture, the genuine growth of everyone involved, that was infinitely sweeter. That was the real triumph. Not just proving my betrayers wrong, but creating something so undeniably right that even they had chosen to become part of it. Looking back at the celebrating team through the balcony doors, former saboteurs now valuable contributors, new talent attracted by our reputation for excellence, clients benefiting from our collaborative approach, I knew that the journey that had begun with betrayal had ended with something far more powerful than retribution. It had ended with redemption, not just for me, but for everyone who had found their way to Mitchell Strategic Consulting, regardless of where their journey had begun.